Over the last 18 hours since I made that motor overheating post, I've gotten lots of requests to maybe turn into a video so it's easier to digest into the soul and easier to understand. So welcome to Albert's Story Time with 2 Cells 1 Pack. Today, the story is about the P6 motor overheating. Now, when we were in China with Max, Zach, and Brian, and they were on the racetrack at the Fugang circuit, Max, being a lighter weight rider, was not able to overheat the motor. However, Brian and Zach were after a couple laps. So Brian was able to overheat after 5.5 laps, roughly. Now, of course, this depended on the specific day that we went to the track, since the temperature and humidity also varies. And in China, it is very hot and very humid. So in China, it was around 35 degrees Celsius, which I guess Christine can put the freedom units right where my finger is later. And the humidity was probably like 90%. Like, you know, you walked out the door and you were sweating, but really it wasn't your sweat. Zach was able to overheat it after around 7 or 8 laps at Fugang. So we did consistent testing to try and figure out what the cause of this overheating was, how we validated those control limits, and how can we solve this issue. Before we get into the resolution and story time, we got to figure out why motor temp is an issue. So as we kind of push higher performance wheels, and there's no EUC in this category that is not susceptible to this. It's just that a lot of these EUCs in the past never had motor temp sensors to begin with inside the stator. So at Inmotion, we wanted to make sure, of course, that everyone is riding safely, and we like to monitor as many parameters as we can to prevent any issues during your riding experience. So as a result, Inmotion requested for a thermal sensor to be placed within the motor so that we know whether or not we will run into an issue or potentially issues throughout the operation of this wheel. Now, in order to prevent issues, there are 3 main factors that are sensitive to this temperature inside the motor. The first one is the Hall sensor, which typically will encounter issues around 150 degrees Celsius rated. The magnets at 140 degrees Celsius rated. And what happens to the magnets is actually demagnetize. And then C is the winding insulation at around 200 degrees Celsius starts to break down, and a motor could potentially short circuit. Now, we want to, of course, prevent these because if any of those do occur, it would result in catastrophic failure and potential cutout and injury of the rider. So during the early days of testing, when we were at the Fugang here, this screenshot was taken from EUC Zach's video. He outlined all the testing that we did, and if you want to get further deeper into the context of the motor overheat, definitely do watch his videos, as he will show you the tilt back and the safety and how often it occurred and so forth, and the kind of solutions and resolutions that we tried to figure out how to go forward with it. Now, the motor temp sensor overheat value initially was set at 140 degrees Celsius, which is, I believe, 280 odd degrees Fahrenheit. And in order to prevent issues, because we're getting into the higher temp scenarios, we wanted to only increase the limit slowly to see issues as they come up without them being catastrophic and causing injuries. And so when we started to raise the limits, we found that at 150 degrees C, the first issue, which a lot of people were asking when they saw the video of us changing the motors between ABS and TEF1 at the Darnell Secret Factory, why we were changing those motors. The reason why is because the first prototypes that we had shipped to the US very early on, we did not see this issue or find the resolution of this issue before those had to be shipped for the deadline of arriving in the US.
When was the date?
So the date of shipment was around September 5th. And we had to ship them September 5th in order for them to arrive in the US by October 11th, which is a whole different story. And I'll tell you that story another day. October 11th for the product launch. Now, the issue was found initially at Fugang around the September 3rd mark. And so we had to ship all the wheels before finding the resolution for this issue so that we could have them in the US. Now, we were in China from September 1st to around September 28th. So that is the testing region that we were, the time frame that we were there. Now, during that time frame, we found out that the aluminum motor cover and the steel bearing, even though we had made the tolerance fit very tight and a friction fit, what would happen is as those temperatures increase, the aluminum thermal conductivity is around 30% higher. Not thermal, the thermal expansion is around 30% higher than steel. And so as the temperatures increase, the aluminum would increase slightly, creating a slight millimeter gaps between the motor cover plate and the stainless steel bearing. Now, what this allows is the stainless steel bearing to kind of rotate relative to the aluminum motor cover. And if you know the construction of a motor or stator, there's two bearings on each side where the axles are, and there's a stator that's in between. Now, this stator, if it rotates, it can kind of touch on the edges of the stator where the magnets are. And that touching was creating contact that is not wanted, of course. So in the middle of September, we were working with the manufacturer to find resolutions, and the resolution was to decrease the tolerancing between the aluminum motor cover and the stainless steel bearing. Now, some people have asked, why not use ceramic bearings or a different type of bearing? This wouldn't have solved the issue, as the issue came from the aluminum expanding greater than the stainless steel. So if you change to ceramic, you would still have the same issue. Now, when the new motors were finished, they arrived to us around the September 20th mark, at which point we went back to the track to validate, which you will see in Zach's later videos. And in those videos, we pushed the temperature slowly, from 140 to 150 to 160, and we didn't have any issues. Now, around that time, Kuji had visited Inmotion, and you might have saw some of his promotional videos of him riding on the Fugang track. Those were on the newer motors, but we hadn't validated we hadn't increased the temperature limits within the firmware. So when Kuji made his review unit or his review video, which you can see here on YouTube, he was only able to run about 15 minutes of sustained 60 miles per hour. And it would allow him to hit the temperature limit set on that firmware. Okay, now fast forward to September 12th at AVS. At AVS, we had the 5 riders, Mario, Max, Aaron, Brian, and Zach, riding our wheels during the racing, qualifying, and everything at AVS. And at that point in time, we had 0 issues with overheating because of the format of the track having more sustained corners rather than longer straights and more hairpins. So as you can imagine, with a track that's set up with longer straights and hairpins or more quick corners, what results is, as a rider, you're going to accelerate, brake, turn, accelerate, brake, and turn. Now, motor overheating is exacerbated by phase current, and phase current is ultimately torque. So the more you decrease, accelerate, and decelerate, the more you can exacerbate the heat issue. At TEF1, or at AVS, we had, at the end of the track, Max had allowed some riders to test his wheel. And we had about 3 or 4, I believe it was, riders who consecutively tested the wheel back-to-back on the track without much of a break in between. And after the 4th person, I believe it was, again, don't quote me on this, the wheel did tilt back and showcase an overheat tilt back as a protection towards the motor. And at that time, the temperature setting was 150 degrees Celsius as well. At TEF1, the firmware still hadn't been changed. We were still having issues or having that limit around the 150 degrees C mark. And so during the qualifying laps, both Mario, Brian, and I believe Aaron were able to overheat the motors during the practice laps qualifiers, where they were doing about 8 to 10 laps consecutively. After that, we wanted to slowly test, so we allowed them to go back out and we tested 150, 155, 160, and that's also the reason why Mark Yu, the product manager, had come from China to LA to come to the races. It wasn't for us to only provide solutions in case issues came up during the races, but we are also using the races as a test bed to see how the motors and controllers and heat and performance would be in real life scenarios in the US. Now, when he went back to China, we wanted to further confirm whether or not this overheating would be a true issue or not. And so as soon as Mark got back, keep in mind he has a baby that's like less than a month old and he's dedicating his time. And so for that, again, I want to just, give a big round of applause to Mark Yu because, his sacrifice is way greater than anyone else on this team. He went back and instantly went to work looking at how to solve this quote-unquote motor overheating issue. Now, the next picture here that I'll show you first is Zach's channel. So if you want to see more about the behind the scenes of each part of the testing that we did to the P6 and his experience in China, please do watch all of his videos. Right now, I believe he has 6 episodes out and a total of 18, so we're 1/3 of the way there. Now, if you look at this motor, so this is a picture that Mark sent me of the stator. You can see here this little red thermistor. That thermistor is the one that's measuring the temperature value of the motor. Now, that thermistor was sitting directly on the windings. So you can think of it as, if, for example, we have this room and you have a thermostat in your room, but you want to get the temperature of the room. Do you put the thermostat on the wall or do you put the thermostat on the coils of the heater? So in this scenario, the thermistor was put on the coils of the heater. And so this is the reason why we were seeing so many issues or seeing that the wheel was able to hit our set temperature limits very easily. Is because the thermistor was put directly on the windings, but the Hall sensor is not directly butted up against the windings. So between the Hall sensor and the windings, there's still air, plastic, and other materials. Between the winding and the magnets, there's also an air gap. So we then found out that by doing more testing, as you can see in this photo, these blue wires here, we've inserted extra thermistors into the motor in order to validate the temperature readings that are being provided by the thermistor, as well as figuring out the actual temperatures at each section of the critical parts of the motor. Now, through this, we were able to notice that even though the winding was hitting 150 degrees Celsius very easily, the Hall sensor location, that's the more critical part, was only at 100 degrees Celsius. And the magnets, because of the air gap between the stator and the rotor, was only at 60 degrees Celsius, those are the other two critical safety issues. So what Mark did was he ran the dyno, pushed the motor to failure in order to validate the temperatures not only in the motor, but also the control board. So on the control board, we have 3 temperature sensors. One on the control board itself, one on the MOSFETs specifically, and one on the IMU specifically. And in this graph here, or the table here, you'll see that although the winding temperature can even get up to 202 degrees, the Hall sensor is only at 145 degrees, the control board 100, the MOSFETs at 91, and the IMU at 87. So Mark ran this test over 100 times, and he found that the sensor fusion calculation within the motor was not accurate, and that is why we kept seeing these overheating tiltbacks. And so he updated the sensor fusion calculation inside the wheel so that the software showing the temperature would be accurate to the safety limits of the motor. Then what he did was he put it into the dyno, and they ran the motor several times until the motor ultimately ended up failing. That is how they found the upper limit of where issues will occur. And then they use that to we created a new limit in the software at 170 degrees Celsius using the sensor fusion so that riders can be safe and not have to worry about cutouts or their motor burning up. There will still be overheating per se. If you happen to ride the P6 at between 60 to 75 miles per hour for a sustained 35 to 45 minutes. So with the technology we have, not including like liquid cooling, Statorade, or other solutions, in this current technological solution, the wheels can be ridden for up to 35 minutes or so at 60 to 75 miles per hour. Of course, there's a lot of assumptions in here, and of course, if you're in New York or a colder region, you may not even notice any motor overheating, whereas if you are in a hotter region, you may notice it more frequently. So over the next couple of days, they're still validating the temperature on the full wheel dyno, and they're going to do real world validation to try and figure out whether that's the theoretical 60 to 70 at 35 to 45 minutes is realistic, but that is based on their current testing data that they have today. I hope that kind of helps you understand the motor overheating issue that we are seeing, and I look forward to having more story time with you guys in the future. Yes, Christine, you have a question.
Will all this issue affect the production date, or like when everyone will get the wheel?
No, because the hardware has been validated, and so the hardware has been set for production, is currently being produced. A lot of this is because Inmotion has historically come from a conservative standpoint of making commuter wheels. The limits that they provide in their firmware on bus current, phase current, motor temp, battery temp, and all these safety limits. Right now, because we're doing a performance wheel, we're pushing all those boundaries to their limits and trying to find a new safety limit per se. So a lot of this was done in software.
So people will still get their wheel on schedule.
People will still get their wheel on schedule. On the hardware side, there's no issues. It's just validating the software side to match the physical constraints of the hardware.
So all they need to do when they get the wheel might just need to be
update it. Correct. Yeah. So when you do get your wheel in the mail, you may need to update it. However, all the wheels that are being produced now will have the most up-to-date firmware. So this motor overheat issue will not be exacerbated in the firmware that you receive in the wheel. And so over the next couple of weeks, as we refine this firmware and continues to do this work into the future, you'll continue to see new updates to making your wheel better.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Albert.
That's all for the motor overheat story. On to the next episode. See you next time.